But what has happened is it's attached to gender. The feminist movement in the late 60s and early 1970s. Necessary in the sense of, wow, we need a flip. Because what had happened was this dominant, controlling, quote, narcissistic, patriarchal masculinity had taken over to where women didn't have a voice. They were over-controlled. They were looked upon as weak, which is unequivocally untrue. But with the feminist movement came a violent shift of the pendulum to the opposite direction. And women began to lose who they were at their core.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I am here with David Lea. We've had a chance to talk a little bit before we press record. We have some really juicy stuff for you. Similar to me, David's really interested in digging into really the roots and origins of our present day challenges when it comes to relationship, with a particular focus on using the lens of polarity and masculine and feminine to kind of make sense of where our past and where our childhood unresolved stuff is showing up. And in our conversation, I felt really supported and excited about the clarity and the sort of embodied nature of how he's speaking about some of these challenges, including things like, narcissistic tendencies and pathologies. We have some things to talk about there that I think might be of interest and potentially might be provocative for some folks. But David, thank you for joining, and I'm really looking forward to getting into the conversation.
Absolutely, Dolphin. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, you bet. So, this podcast is really about providing a kind of behind-the-scenes look at, what people who are really steeped in this world, who walked the road and are supporting others in. I think there's a sense-making component, like how do we make sense of often what I'm talking now about the anatomy of love and healthy relationship. There are certain principles and things that really work, but then when we go beyond the anatomy, there's also like the nuances of how we show up in the moment in a way that's facilitative, in a way that's integrative. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to this idea of, how do we start to approach, we're listening to the podcast, we have some challenges with, we know we have some issues, we're not perfect. We also look to our partner and say, wow, like there's all these challenges, there's these ways they show up that I find really difficult. For you, how and where do you start with someone who's at least willing to ask the question of how do we make this better?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that we stand on is a foundation of what we refer to as extreme ownership. So when folks come to us and say, hey, we need help with our marriage, we need help with our relationship, I lovingly correct them at the top. You cannot mend, fix, or save a marriage. You cannot mend, fix, or save a relationship. It is about your extreme ownership and personal responsibility for what you bring to the table, so to speak. And so it's really, really important for folks to come into that space to know their wounding is their wounding, and their wounding has nothing to do with their spouse, which is incredibly counterintuitive to a cultural, societal, and historical narrative that often says, oh, two shall become one. And when you fall in love, all is well. And we fall into Hallmark cards and rom-coms, and people believe that when you find the one, when you find your partner, when you find the love of your life, which, by the way, I'm not even sure what that means. I'm not even sure this would be an interesting conversation of what love is. What does that mean? People will say, well, I'm in love with them, or I only love them. I want to love them. Well, I love them, so that's why I stay. What does that mean? We consistently are challenging our clients by asking questions about perhaps the most simplistic phrases that people just kind of roll over and don't even process and think about. They think, oh, I need help to save my marriage. I want to extend. You are the perfect professional to help my husband. How do I get him in contact with you? And I consistently, again, lovingly challenge them to say, you can only be responsible for your healing process and your healing journey. I work with married couples, committed couples every single day, but I work with them one-on-one, independently, individually. And we have seen incredible results in that. We don't subscribe to couples coaching. We don't subscribe to couples therapy. We don't subscribe to that because each individual's trauma passed through our lens is theirs. And it's unique and it's profound and it's important. And when we couple that together too soon, we have a milieu of down in the weeds of misunderstanding and trying to understand how one's wounds will blend with another, which we refer to as a trauma bond, right? Which most relationships are connected in that way. And we think, oh, we have something in common, when in reality, it's unprocessed childhood wounding that's connecting a spouse to another spouse.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. There's a lot there in what you just said. I think what I want to kind of touch into is when we're talking about radical responsibility, or like radical ownership, extreme ownership, I think you called it. I think people will often push back because, again, especially in Western culture, there's the sense that the society, the powers that be, are meant to come in and kind of take care of us. And this sort of so it's a paternalistic perspective, is like, this power out there should take care of me. And there's something beautiful about that. I think if we belong to a really embedded, close-knit community, there are elders, there are people ahead of us along the path. And I think there is a rightful way in which those people are meant to hold us and support us along our journey. But we're meant to be consistently moving in the direction of full responsibility and accountability for ourselves. That enables us to be pillars in community for others. So I'm curious if you can sort of just peel back some of the tangled misconception we might have around, like, why would someone resist responsibility? There's some ideas that I have about that. And how do we get over that if we have, whether it's because mom and dad were really controlling and we kind of, we gave over our own authority and power because it was too much conflict with mom and dad. They wanted to, like, how do we start to get to the roots of our misconception about being fully responsible for ourselves in relationship?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So in childhood, we experience the most vulnerable and most susceptible to influence by our primary caregivers: mom, dad, grandma and grandpa, strangers, coaches, mentors, whoever it may be. That's when trauma first enters the body. And so if we have a dysregulating experience, a trauma experience in childhood, that imprints on the nervous system and carries throughout into adulthood. What happens is we desire, we crave extreme ownership, autonomy, and sovereignty as a child. However, we need to understand what that means as we continue to develop as a child. We need the leadership, we need the safety and security of a caregiver to provide us ample opportunity to make our own decisions while we're under the authority of healthy caregiving. But what most often happens is that sovereignty, that autonomy, is taken away because of cultural narratives and obviously trauma wounding from parents and grandparents and generational trauma from over and over and over and over again over the time. That says, for example, children shall be seen, not heard. There's one that is ample throughout the several past generations and many, many generations in the past. And so a voice of the child is taken away. And it's not until they're an adult that they need a voice, and yet they haven't had the opportunity to understand what that sovereignty, what that autonomy really is. And so then it becomes, in childhood, an enmeshment that occurs, a codependent relationship with a power be. Either it is a codependent or it's an overbearing, controlling relationship. And either way, that voice is taken away and the child is left wondering how he or she moves through life because his voice or her voice is taken away. We firmly believe that we as children know instinctively, intuitively, what a boundary is. We know who we are as children, but it can be quickly stripped away when we're told not to believe something, when we're told that you should follow the family, do as the family does, that extreme loyalty within a family takes and strips away the independence, strips away the sovereignty and the autonomy from the child. And then they're left with, I'm not sure who I am, what I'm supposed to do. And then, of course, they become reliant on a parent, a caregiver, a coach, a mentor to tell them what to do. And then that lends into codependency. And then when things go south in a relationship, we look to the other person and say, well, I need your help. I need to mend this relationship. You're to blame because I don't have the tools and the strategies to take full extreme ownership over my behavior. It must be their problem because of those codependent wounds that that were solidified in childhood.
Hmm. So, I want to, it's not really pushing back, but like there's other perspective out there that says, these trauma wounds from early relationship need healthy, nurturing relational connection to heal. And you're saying you do your work separately with people. I'm curious your
Mhm.
take on that. I've heard a lot of people that I really enjoy and love and respect speak about the necessity of the co-holding of wounds and hurt in relationship in a way that's transformative and healing to those relational wounds. The core beliefs we have about relationship, that I actually can't feel my hurt and be loved and held by another. Like, what's your I would be curious to hear what you have to say about where that comes in if you're working with people separately around these
Mhm.
relational trauma wounds.
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you for pushing back.
Mm.
That's how we have intriguing conversations. So Dolphin, I'll give you my definition, our definition of how we coach and teach, our definition of a healthy relationship. This is it. When I, meaning me, commit to my ongoing and consistent healing, growth, and transformation, so that then I can support my partner who is doing the same. That's it. That's a relationship. It's not till death do us part. It's not marriage. It's not cohabitation. It's not a 401k. It's not beautiful children. It's not great sex. It's not having all the things in common. It is simply taking full, extreme ownership over your healing, growth, and transformation through the rest of your days so that you can then support your partner who is doing the same. So it is extreme ownership. And yet, what we do tell and coach individuals is the most incredible healing you will ever experience is inside the container of a relationship. Why? Because it's trial and error. I am a more healed individual. I'm a more healed husband because I'm married to Paige. Now, I'm not dependent on her. She doesn't determine my healing, and her healing has nothing to do with mine. But we work independently in our own lives for that growth, healing, and transformation every single day. Why do I choose her today? It doesn't necessarily, by the way, mean that I will choose her tomorrow, which can be very provocative. But I choose her today because I'm inspired by how that woman is committed to her own healing, growth, and transformation today. That's why I'm committed to the co-creation of this relationship that I choose between her and myself.
So you're basically advocating for the deep trauma healing work to be individual, and that the relationship is the kind of exploration and testing ground to then grow into what all of that healing enables within relationship. Is that a kind of
Absolutely.
accurate assessment?
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so we talked before we got on the air about this kind of the tendency, especially in Western culture, to characterize, categorize, and kind of pathologize behavioral strategies, which really are a kind of trauma response in this context that we're talking. All of these very kind of well practiced, entrained, kind of automated reflexes around behavior that come up when we feel hurt or triggered. Um, a lot of the medicalization of mental health wants to pathologize all of that. One of the topics you brought up is narcissistic personality disorder. I would love to get into a little bit of your take on that. And what do we do? Like, you're saying you don't believe in that, which on a certain level in a certain conversation, I love that. I agree. I got in some hot water as I spoke about narcissism recently online. It turned into a bit of a firestorm in the comments. And I think that it makes sense to be, aware of and sensitive to the hurts that people bring in, like some of the way that children are cared for and treated by their parents is horrendous and then horrific, and it leaves them with deep wounds and high sensitivities. And, I can see all sorts of problems with the way in which we speak about the aftermath of narcissism within a child's life, and of course into adulthood. That's just not helpful. So I would love to hear your take on that, because I think it's a bigger conversation, but narcissism, especially in today's world around relationships, it's just so pervasively used and talked about. So I want to
Hmm.
hear what you have to say. And then what would you do if you were, this is a question I ask myself, like what would if I was in charge of the quote unquote approach to healing narcissism in the world,
Hmm.
what would I do, or what would I encourage, or what would I invite? I'm curious about that for you. What would you be doing in these spaces where often it's just a bash fest? It's just the evil narcissist has done it all, and what do we do to heal ourselves in spite of
Hmm.
that? Is
Yeah.
often the narrative that I hear.
Yeah. Well, you nailed it when the last thing you just said, Dolphin, when you said, how do I heal myself? So this goes back to our earlier conversation. When we take full extreme ownership over what and who we are, we no longer need to label anyone else. Every time we label somebody as a narcissist or somebody as a codependent, which, by the way, you cannot have narcissistic behavior without a corresponding codependent behavior. So those are two wounded individuals who are encased in a codependent relationship. So, and from our perspective, narcissism, and I'm using air quotes for those that are just listening, is actually what we refer to as an umbrella term that covers a series of masculine energetic wounds derived from childhood trauma, like control, like dominance. I'm reading off some of my notes. Overdoing and coercive and controlling and blaming and argumentative. Those are all, in many ways, attached to this idea of narcissism. The reality is someone who carries those wounds is how we identify is simply a wounded individual. We don't need to heap on the layers and layers of labels. Everyone is simply wounded, which from our perspective, every single individual on the planet, Dolphin, has unprocessed, unreleased, unhealed childhood trauma. Every single one of us. We have variant levels of that, and every single one of us has the opportunity to heal. However, our trauma response to pathology, to diagnoses, is the very nature of why we believe that healing is blocked. It is less we want to our previous conversation, we want to blame the person who hurt us, which I completely understand. But when we begin to take extreme ownership over our choices, our responsibilities, our decisions, the reality is we chose the person who is struggling with narcissistic wounding. Now that is a provocative statement and by the way, I appreciate you getting in hot water, because I get in hot water all the time, so we can commiserate on that.
Yeah, sure.
But in order for us to provide a new narrative to really spark conversation, that's what I'm all about, is having conversation. Let's have productive conversation. When folks begin to understand, wow, that person I chose based on the wounds within me, because we choose partners based on our own trauma wounding. So if we choose someone who possesses narcissistic wounding, it's because we have wounding that feels safe, believe it or not, under the auspices of that narcissistic behavior. Because it mirrors and it's veiled, and it feels actually to the wounded nervous system of the codependent individual, it feels like they can take care of me. It feels like they have it together. It feels like, they have a commanding presence. Therefore, from a feminine woman who is attracted to that, it makes sense. Of course, she's looking for masculine leadership. Of course she is. But it's veiled, potentially, in that narcissistic wounding.
Yeah, and just as a sense-making piece, because a lot of people might push back or might disagree, like, oh, that doesn't feel safe, that person is not safe.
Sure.
And if you grew up with someone who may fall on this spectrum of
Mhm.
narcissistic behavior, for sure, that it's not safe in certain ways. But I think a way to make sense of it, or a way to understand it better, is that if we look at the kind of underlying dynamics of the survival mechanisms of biology, if you're alive as an adult, it means your parents got you there, right? I'm doing air quotes. Like, it worked. In terms of survival, you made it past childhood, through adolescence, into adulthood. And whatever got you there in a certain way from the perspective of survival is worth perpetuating. It's worth proliferating. And so like just a way for us to kind of step back and go like, why would I be drawn to something that from a surface mental perspective, I go like, it was so bad, it was so hard, it's so painful to be with this person. But underlying all that, life wants to life, I often say. Like life wants to continue. It wants to move its evolution into the next stage, the next generation. And so whatever worked to get you here is what you'll be attracted to. And I think that both works from the survival perspective, but it also works from a perspective of if life wants to sort out what's not yet sorted out, it would put you back in contact with the very things that wounded you. Because I believe there's an intrinsic intelligence to re-engaging what happened in the midst of trauma from a conscious perspective, with conscious action and conscious choice. I think that's sort of at the bedrock of our healing, is us learning how to be conscious and caring where we weren't met with consciousness and caring as a child. And so on both sides, that just as a sense making, like, so we can kind of stop blaming ourselves, stop like being hard on ourselves for choosing people that, again, quote unquote, aren't right for us. But I also believe there's a stage of development and ownership that we get to where we go, oh, I don't have to choose this anymore. But I do think we have to get there. We have to get to a place where the thing that we have been choosing that we know is not good for us gets to a place where we know I'm actually complete enough to move on without this pattern anymore. So anything you want to say about that, or if there's sort of anything else you'd like to say about the labeling of narcissism and how we approach the person healing, but then I'd love to get into your thoughts on healing if someone is a narcissist.
Sure.
How does that pattern heal?
Yeah. It's important, it's critical, certainly through our work, is we have to understand why we're choosing that person. So to say, oh, we're just not going to choose that person anymore. Well, our nervous system is incredibly powerful, and it does, to your point, want to survive. It's incredibly powerful. It's amazing that we survived childhood. Any of us, right? It's amazing. Emotionally, physically, spiritually, sexually, it's amazing that we survive. And as we leverage a specific healing modality known as IFS, parts work, audience may be familiar with that. What we understand is that our trauma wounding resides in our nervous system and comes forward in adulthood as voices, as parts of us, as childhood parts of us that still believe we're 7 years old, experiencing the quote narcissistic behavior from dad. And so it's no wonder why we make those choices. The choices are, though, myopic. They're childlike. Without the experience, without the purview of what adulthood brings to us, the child simply wants to survive, and so much of that survival is about remaining safe, and that safety is connected to familiarity. So if I feel familiar, this feels familiar, therefore it feels safe, but it's incredibly myopic. It doesn't realize that, in fact, as we take, to get to your point about healing, when we begin to work with our clients, it's imperative that, one, we begin to identify the original wounding. Where in the world did that come from, that it felt like it was safe or familiar to be under the control of someone else? Okay, we need to identify, when did that happen? When was the earliest remembrance of that? And sometimes people will come to us and say, I don't believe I have trauma. In fact, I have very few memories from childhood. Ah, exactly. Because what has happened is trauma has overtaken the self, as we describe through IFS, through Richard Schwartz's work. And so when we begin to identify those original wounds, or as he claims, OIs, original incidences that still reside inside the nervous system and come forth as triggered as childlike parts in our adulthood, it's imperative that as an adult, we realize, wait, I'm not entrapped anymore. I'm not under the control of dad or mom anymore. And so we need to begin to have conversations, literal conversations with those wounded parts when they come forward, that feels like, oh, I need to choose this person. I need to continue to choose my spouse, but it's no longer serving me. That's the battle, is that our parts are coming forward and saying, don't do this or do this, when the self, the integrated, healthy leader within all of us, has a different plan, and it's grown up, and it knows, and it has experience and tools and strategies in which to begin to heal and make better choices. And yet we have these parts come forward and say, that's not safe. It's not familiar. You don't know what is on the other side of that. It's very much the devil you know versus the angel you don't, to use that type of language. Is,
Yeah.
wow, I don't know what it means on the other side of this relationship that no longer serves me. So I'm going to stay in this because it feels familiar and I can operate within that.
Yeah, and I often think about, what we're asking people to do in that is essentially step into the unknown,
Mm-hmm.
where there aren't any experiential guarantees that by stepping away from what's familiar, what feels like, the lifeline that's helped us navigate the most challenging aspects of our lives, that's going to go well to step away from that path. How do you, like, maybe you could speak to like some of your journey around, like, you said we all have childhood wounds, unprocessed stuff from when we were younger. Can you say anything about your journey and why it is you kind of came to your current frame and perspective
Mm-hmm.
on things? And then I'd love to hear you speak to how do we, maybe this is speaking to someone who's maybe in a position of support or guidance to someone else. If someone wants things to really change, but they haven't fully stepped away from the path of, basically what I would describe as the trajectory of their trauma, how do we start to invite people to like even recognize, like, this is going to be worth it? It's not going to feel worth it at first. It's going to feel like saying yes to more insecurity and more pain and more hurt and more vulnerability, but ultimately it's worth it. How do we bring people around in that way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, to share a little bit of my story, Dolphin. So I lost my mother when I was just 2 weeks old. She died of birth complications related to me, which, by the way, I carried some of that wounding for a long time. But what I came to realize, and then I was connected with a father who was, as we say, emotionally unavailable. He was an incredible provider. He was a wonderful man. I admired him, and yet my relationship with my dad throughout my life until his death several years ago was incredibly complex and complicated. But I grew up in a world that was confusing from the jump. So my father remarried fairly quickly at about 2 years old. So I grew up with a mother that I thought, hey, was mommy. I called her mommy. Oh my God, this is mom. All the while knowing that she wasn't. So that provided an enormous amount of complexity in my nervous system. Thinking, I have several moms. I belong to somebody else, but I never met them. Incredibly odd. And yet I was loved. I was cherished. I was honored as a little boy. Well, my father went through my childhood and went through several women. Married. I had stepmoms, all wonderful, as I like to call them, bonus moms. But it was always incredibly confusing. Incredibly confusing because I felt like I was missing out on a relationship that is so pivotal in the growth and development of a boy, his mother. And I would even take on surrogate moms from my buddies and girlfriends and all the things throughout my rearing. And what that wounding left within me was me searching for a nurturing, caregiving, dominant, and even controlling personality because I felt left out. I felt like I didn't have a nurturer in an original mothering relationship, and my father was emotionally unavailable. And so, who did I begin to choose as romantic partners beginning in my teenage years and throughout my 20s and 30s and 40s? Was I chose wounded masculine women. And there was this wounding within me that said, I want to be led by them. I want to be loved by them. I want to be honored by them. I want to be controlled by them. I want them to save me and fix me. All the while I was trying to save and fix them because I couldn't save my mother. All this was coming out through my therapy and coaching and all the healing modalities that I have and continue to move through. So it shaped me as a very passive, very communicative, very creative man who would choose, again, wounded masculine women. And so the inverted polarity was in place. I was in my wounded feminine, she, a myriad of different women, was historically in her wounded masculine energy. So it worked until it didn't, until I began to understand and begin to be taught and coached and mentored and trained by individuals who fully understood what polarity, what trauma healing was. That's why that is our intersection of trauma healing and masculine and feminine energy, is what my wife and I help others do. So that's my story, in that realizing, I have spent the vast majority of my life in my wounded feminine energy. So I know exactly what it feels like. We have the vast majority of folks who come to us are men in their feminine energy and women in their masculine energy, inverted relationships, and they want to figure out how to reverse that dynamic, which Paige and I have. In fact, my wife Paige, when we first met, we were in that inverted dynamic. I was more in my feminine, she was more in her masculine. And through our own work, we began to reverse it. And now we help others do the same.
So I think a question that comes up there is, I think there can be a sense of, like, I just need to come into my, say I'm a man and I'm in my wounded feminine and I need to come into my masculine. And as you do, there may be this sort of pie in the sky idea that as I do that, she'll just soften and relax and it'll all really work. But what's also needed is a kind of requisite matching of the shift from her, because what I've experienced, I definitely can relate to wounded feminine and that being a kind of dominant theme in relationships, that as I step into more leadership, there's way more conflict. As she maybe sometimes does and sometimes doesn't relinquish her hold on control, which is like, that's her lifeline. For her wounding, control is her lifeline. So speak a little bit to the challenge that goes along, whether it's the woman softening before the man's ready to come in and take leadership, or the man coming in and taking leadership before the woman's ready to soften. Like, how do you see that, and how do you support people in that shift? Obviously, you're about the individual shifting, but I know there's that other side that then becomes the hopefully the training ground, but sometimes the battleground around those shifts.
It can feel like the battleground for sure. So, and it goes back to extreme ownership. If a man is solely concerned about how he's going to heal both his masculine and feminine energetic wounding from childhood to help him step into his healing masculine energy as an adult, that's his journey. Whether or not his wife responds is not his problem, which is so hard. When we're in the midst of a relationship, we tend to fall back into a transactional narrative that says, if I do, then you will, which is the vast narrative amongst relationships. Well, I did this, so you need to do this. I got my she shed, so I get a man cave. I did this, so I get a sexual favor. Well, I need praise because I did the dishes. You take care of the kids because I did last week. It's transactional, it's competitive, and it's unhealthy. So we are consistently, every single day, communicating this extreme ownership that says, you are responsible. If I'm speaking to a woman who wants to surrender and soften into her feminine energy, she needs to come into a place of healing where she's healing both her feminine and her masculine wounding. She doesn't need her husband to step into his masculine in order for her to be in her feminine. We often hear this in the polarity world, is he needs to step up, he needs to leave to put her in her feminine. That is a myth. That is not accurate. Because of this extreme ownership, because of radical personal responsibility, she and she alone is responsible for her understanding that she carries, by the way, she carries healthy masculine energy for her to navigate and make choice and make decisions and be in that doing energy. She doesn't want to spend all of her time there. Obviously, this is when she's in her wounded masculine all the time, doing and overachieving and overthinking and exhausted and burned out and overwhelmed. But it is a woman's responsibility to understand herself as a feminine woman and all that entails. And it's the man's responsibility to understand what it means to be a masculine man. That it is not a necessity for the other partner to step into their core energy in order for them. Because now we're back into codependency. Well, I'm stepping up into my masculine energy, so you need to surrender and soften. there's where the battle comes. There's where the combat comes. You were indicating, wow, I want to step forward and be in a more leadership role as a masculine man, and that's going to naturally put my woman in her feminine. No, it's not. Most especially if she has wounding that says, no, I need to be in control in order to survive. Yeah, I get it. I understand. Those walls need to come up because you have needed them for 30 or 40 or 50 years. But now we have this wonderful, weird, complex, who is this guy that I married? He used to be this way, and now he's stepping forward, and now we have two masculine energies coming forward. Well, no wonder we have conflict. No wonder it's so combative. And the same is true, by the way, if a man is in his wounded feminine energy and his wife chooses to now surrender and soften into her feminine energy. Now we have two recessive feminine energies and nobody's taking control. And we have conflict. Most notably, we have resentment and bitterness that builds because that's passive anger as opposed to combative and explosive anger that's in the wounded masculine.
Yeah, lovely. I can really see and feel the value there. And I think I'm still questioning it, and I'm questioning it not because I don't get what you're saying, but because I think that it's a common place we go, which is like, where does the real rightful interdependence come in? Like, if you could speak to how you see that, because I know that when two people own their shit and they take responsibility and they really start to heal the deeper stuff, there's a natural desire to be generous. There's a natural desire to come together and to give and to hold and to care for and nurture and provide all those things as a natural outpouring, not as, like you say, not as a transaction, not as a I'll do this so that, but doing this work separately and siloing it doesn't feel like the whole story. So can you speak a little bit to what you see as the way in which we're meant to come together as we heal our wounded polarities, as we heal these masculine and feminine wounds? What's the way that we can come together, or what helps facilitate us coming together in a way that feels so nourishing and whole and complete?
Yeah. So ultimately, the goal is that we are healing both our masculine and feminine energetic wounding within the self, within the individual, so that we're a holistic soul, spirit, without anyone. That no one has ownership or control over how we respond, how we behave, how we navigate life. The outpouring of that internal healing is love and generosity and passion and purpose that extends from us and affects everyone around us. It affects our wife, it affects our children, it affects everything around us. But because we are working on the whole self, we're working on our individual wounds. I am a better man for my wife. It is an outpouring. It is, I have to put on my mask first before I put on the mask of someone else, right? You can't pour from an empty cup. So when I'm only focused on how my masculine energy can change my world and bring me into the masculine man that I was forged to become, my wife benefits, my children benefit, the world around me benefits, clients benefit, because I'm taking care of me. So it is nuanced. It's incredibly fragile. It's a slippery slope. But it has to be intact. This extreme ownership must be intact, or we're always going to falter into codependent patterns. Always. Well, I'm doing this, so you need to do this. The connection that I have with my wife is otherworldly because she feels safe and secure and beautiful and radiant and sensual and arousing and all the feminine. And she's healing her masculine wounds so she can stand firm in her boundaries, her healing masculine energy. And that naturally then draws me closer. But she's not doing it to win me. And I'm not being more of a, quote, man in order to win her. I am healing my wounds solely for me. And the benefit of that is that I have an otherworldly, passionate, purpose-filled, co-creative marriage with Paige. If God forbid something happens to Paige tomorrow, I not only survive, I thrive moving forward because I am not attached to her life. Same goes with my children. I'm not attached. I'm not codependent with my children. Do I love them? Of course I do. But my life is not dependent on them. I come first, not them. I come first, not Paige. I come first, not my clients. I come first, not my business. I always come first. And the benefit that comes from that, I often say this to men, Dolphin. The only level of appreciation that men ever need when they're healing their wounded masculine and feminine energies is when they know and they see the smile on his wife's face. That's it. We don't need gifts. We don't need attaboys. We don't need flattery. We don't need praise. We don't need any of that. The masculine, the deep, powerful masculine within a man simply wants to know that his actions are bringing peace and joy and happiness and passion to those that he loves. That's what motivates him. But he's motivated because it's doing it to himself first. Why do I love to lead? Because it feels, and I know that it's absolutely right. Now, whether or not Paige follows me, well, she follows me because I'm confident in my own self-leadership. She told me the other day, Dolphin, she said, babe, the sexiest thing that you did today was when you shared something that came forward in your coaching call with your coach, something that was incredibly vulnerable, incredibly sensitive, and that you committed to working on that element of your wounding, and then you shared it with me. It's the sexiest thing you can ever do, is when you confess, you come to a level of vulnerability and transparency as a man, and then has an action, then has purpose to take him further. Because a woman who has that type of masculine presence in her life, she'll follow him anywhere because he knows where he's going. He has a plan. He has a predictive narrative. He has a way forward. It's not selfishness. It's not narcissism. It is purpose-driven, whole, powerful, devoted, masculine energy that woman, and what we have found across the planet, that every woman will follow. Now, between the wounding that so many people face and that standard can be a long way. And I understand, which goes back to your question, is how do we even begin to get there? Well, yeah, slowly, because this healing journey is a lifelong journey.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot there. I think what I want to kind of move as we get close to the end of the call, I want to know some practicals. So like for you, you work with IFS. I love IFS. I've done, personally explored that. And obviously I use elements of it in my work with people. I'm curious with, especially a guy, Damian Bowler, who I really enjoy, is a kind of colleague, friend of mine. He does a lot of stuff around polarity, and he talks about the polarity flip, this current shift where men are choosing to and able to be more feminine, and women are choosing to and able to be more masculine. And there's something, he talks about, there's something right about that, like this stage of human development where we're not, I think the whole reason men embodied that masculine in the survival context is because that's what we were more built for, and what worked had to be utilized. Like you couldn't afford to not be masculine if you were the more masculine of the pair or of the community. And now we don't have that survival pressure. And so this flip has happened. And I think there's something true about the flip. There's something true about us being able to be in and explore these quote unquote opposite ends of the polarity spectrum. But I also know that when I look at current society, I think we're getting lost in identification, like misplaced identification with these energies and with these sort of gender profiles. And so I'm curious about, for that flip, the feminine man and the masculine woman, Can you leave us with something practical for each of those two? Because I think whereas not everyone's going to identify with that, I think the people you work with, it's very much a center of gravity. And I also think there's a lot of men and a lot of women out there who, if they were able to get more into the healing of that core wound, it would make the biggest difference for them in having the relationships they want. So can you leave us with something practical for each of those two?
Yeah. One of the when folks are confused or they have questions or even come to us in a combative nature, that they may not necessarily believe in polarity or have seen it be misgiven in their life, where they identify masculinity as toxic. And I understand that wounding. I get it. So we've had some social movements over the last 50 years that have taken this gender connected polarity, which it's not, by the way. So every single soul possesses both masculine and feminine energy. But what has happened is it's attached to gender. The feminist movement in the late 60s and early 1970s, necessary in the sense of, wow, we need a flip. Because what had happened was this dominant, controlling, quote, narcissistic, patriarchal masculinity had taken over to where women didn't have a voice. They were over-controlled. They were looked upon as weak, which is unequivocally untrue. But with the feminist movement came a violent shift of the pendulum to the opposite direction. And women began to lose who they were at their core. Then we had the Me Too movement several years ago. Necessary in the sense of we need to call out what's been going on behind closed doors. It needs to come forward. But what it did, again, is violently shifted that pendulum to the other side. And men began to soften and surrender into their femininity out of fear. What we men heard was, do not touch me, do not come near me, do not control me, do not lead me. You ask for permission, you ask for consent at every turn of our relationship. Well, what that did for masculinity was it set a man back into his passive feminine energy and said, cool, we're going to be equal. We're going to be 50-50. You do you, you do you. We can have this sense of equity in our relationship, which from our work, what we have found is absolutely a misnomer. It doesn't work. So we have women who say, I want a man to lead me, but do not control me. We have men who, I want a woman to be sensual and arousing and surrendering and soft, but I don't want her to be weak. I don't want her to be a doormat. And so there's all this confusion about what is healthy masculine and healthy feminine. That's what we teach our clients first, is this is what healthy masculine is. Oh, I had no idea that's what healthy masculine is. I had no idea that this is healthy feminine. And so one of the practical things that we do with our clients first is we take them through a very easy, simple activity for them to identify right here, right now, what their core energy is. And they begin to see, oh my gosh, if my core energy, if it's a woman, my core energy is feminine because I feel this. This is what I crave. I don't have it. I have never sensed that I can be truly in my feminine energy. I want it, but I'm not sure how to get there. And the same goes for men. When a man truly understands the decisive and powerful and strong and devoted and provisionary and protective energy that the masculine has, and it's interesting because we work with couples. When we say those words to them, when they identify their core energy, we literally watch their wives go, that's what I want. And often the man's like, really? That's what you want? I had no idea. I was terrified to make a decision. I was terrified to take control over a difficult situation because of my wounding, because of my attachment to not wanting to be in a combative relationship. And so everybody steps back. Everybody either steps back or steps forward in an inverted energy, and everybody's confused to your point. But what we have found is the practical way is we first have to identify what and who are we? Who am I? When I began to go down this journey and identify, oh my gosh, I am in my wounded feminine energy the vast majority of the time. That did not feel right. I could feel it. I knew it. And it felt so, for the lack of a better term, so wrong. It felt so wrong. And Paige had the same experience when we were first introduced this. And it has been, I think we talked about this earlier, it has been so challenging. We work on this every single day now. We are always identifying this in our own home. Wow. Okay, I made that decision. That didn't feel right. Oh, I needed you to step up and make this decision. Well, I felt like this because it was going to be combative and we were going to argue. So we are constantly navigating our own woundings within this paradigm as well. Ask that question. You had, I think I lost the second part of that
what
question.
came up for me as you were saying that is, I think what can be operating there is, a man's idea that he wants to give his wife or his partner freedom. He wants her to feel free.
Yep.
And he doesn't want to impose his will on her in a way that interrupts or threatens that freedom. And again, this is where the nuance comes in. There's something true about that. A man is not there to control his partner. And if he's so afraid of providing some kind of frame or structure or direction for their lives, she doesn't feel like she can trust his leadership. And so there's this interplay that's very complex, that's very nuanced, but also has simple principles at the heart of it that can really help. So can you pick that thread up? And I just feel like there's the last piece there for men and women that I think will be really supportive. And we may have to do this again. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I really enjoy the clarity that you speak from. I think it's really supportive to this conversation and to people's journey.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dolphin. We were working with a couple just last night and navigating some of these I work with this particular couple one-on-one. When we feel they are ready, we offer an opportunity for them to get on a call with both Paige and I, the four of us on a call, when we feel they're ready. We don't do this at the top because it would be an S show, so to speak, because there's so much rigidity there. What this particular couple found was he was, again, so scared to step forward because he was under this perfectionist wound that says it's got to be absolutely right because I hear her consistently nag me when it's not right. And yet she's terrified that he's not going to do it right. So she comes forward in her wounded masculine energy and says, you're not doing it right.
Oops.
Yeah. He's like, oh. So it was beautiful. It was powerful to see them become incredibly vulnerable and open and transparent, where he was, I am scared because of his wounding, because of his lack of understanding how conflict can be productive. Where did that come from? His childhood wounds. Where he can now step forward and say, I am making this decision out of a healing energy of consistency, which she has lacked, has never seen in all of her relationships with dad, with boyfriends, with husbands. And what we helped them identify, what we helped her identify, is 6 or 7 consistencies from his masculine leadership that she had completely overlooked, and yet was so important to her. I mean, tears were flowing between the two of them, and she realized, oh my gosh, he is providing this masculine frame. And I have so many wounded parts that are forcing against that because she doesn't trust it yet. So it's her wounding to begin to surrender unto her own understanding of what her healing masculine energy is within her. I've often said, if you don't trust others, it's because you're untrustworthy within yourself. That could be hard to hear. Talk about extreme ownership.
Yeah.
If you don't trust others, it's because you lack trust within yourself. If you think everybody's lying to you, it's because you're lying to yourself. That's hard to hear. I understand.
Yes.
So when we can fully bring a client forward to know that everything that's affecting their life is within their control. That they can begin to heal the wounds that keep them in a over-controlling or a passive or a people-pleasing or a perfectionist or a judgmental energy if they're fully responsible for their ownership. It's amazing to watch when we do work with the couples and come forward. When they take ownership, they're ready to go have sex right then and there, right? It builds such an incredible amount of intimacy when someone says, you know what? This is on me. I have to work on me. I am committed to working on me so I can support you in working with you. When we see that, that's the juice. That's the clarity. That's when relationships truly begin to transform. Did I answer your question? I may not.
Yeah.
Great.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So, for people that have enjoyed the conversation as much as me, if they want more, if they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to find you online?
Yeah. Our website is daring-deeply.com, daring-deeply.com. Our coaching practice is called Daring Deeply. We're all over the socials. So we have a rather robust following on TikTok and Instagram, Facebook. We also have a YouTube channel. We're getting ready to launch our podcast later this summer, so we're excited about that. But you can find us all over the socials. My name is David Lea. My wife is Paige Lea, Paigelea, for those of you out there. Our last name is Lee. We pronounce it Lee, but it's spelled Lea. So please reach out to us. We're excited to have conversations with anyone who's really wanting to understand what polarity and trauma healing together can manufacture within their marriage.
Yeah. Beautiful. David, I really appreciate your time, your expertise, your clarity. Again, I would love to stay in touch. I'll make sure those links are in once this goes live. The links will all be in there. And until next time, my friends, love well.